All right. Give everyone a minute to join. We're excited to be here and ready to talk about compliance in New Jersey, the hottest topic in town. All right. Well, people are still going to be filing in for a little bit, but let's dive in. So, really excited on this actually kind of lovely morning here in New Jersey to talk about our presentation, how to run a compliant cannabis dispensary in New Jersey. So, I am joined by two of my excellent colleagues. So first I'll introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Cabrera. I'm a partner with Vicente LLP. I work with companies that are applying for licenses and have licenses in New York and New Jersey. And I'm based out of our New Jersey office is more of a state of mind than an actual physical location, but we're here for you. All right, next up is my really excellent colleague, Casey Lever, who is probably the single most knowledgeable person I know on compliance for cannabis dispensaries. Casey, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm the Director of Regulatory Compliance for Vicente Cedarburg. I cover East Coast compliance, Northeast region, in particular right now, really being the big focus. Most of my day-to-day is spent in facilities, really helping our clients in any state that they're in, navigate the inspection process, get up and running, stay compliant, packaging, labeling reviews, advertising reviews, and a lot of strategic growth as well, really being able to transition into a new market such as New Jersey. If you're coming from another well-established market or even one like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, kind of navigating the nuances and being able to put a practical application to some of these regulations and guidance that comes out.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. And I just want to put in a quick plug. While Casey is based out of our Boston office, and you might be able to tell from that accent, is from the great state of Massachusetts. She knows so much about New Jersey regulations, it's not even funny. So she's been working with a lot of our companies that are getting licensed in New Jersey and is an absolutely fantastic resource. So just my plug for Casey's awesomeness.
Thanks, Jen.
Next up is Steve Pemberton, the man, the myth, the legend.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Steve Pemberton. I'm an associate here in the New Jersey office of Vicente. Mostly focused on licensing and regulatory issues. At this point, we've had pretty good success with helping our clients get licensed, whether it be conditional or municipal or some medical licensing. So I'm proud to be part of the Vicente team here and excited to share a lot of really good information with you today on New Jersey dispensary compliance and licensing.
Awesome. And Steve has worked with a number of our clients as they've been expanding to adult use for our medical clients and also with our adult use applicants who are getting licensed and getting up and running. So I'm really here just to moderate and provide light entertainment, but the real two experts are my colleagues here. So first, I think, Steve, you're going to I can do a quick overview of what we're going to be covering. So first up is the path to getting operational as a medical or adult use dispensary. And I know our focus here is on dispensaries, but I think a lot of the lessons are equally true for manufacturing and cultivators. So I think there's a bit of everything here. Some compliance essentials. Tips for our medical dispensaries that are looking to expand to adult use. So what does that application look like? What do you want to make sure you include in there? Next, we'll cover briefly what to expect during your facility inspection process. So Steve and Casey have both been involved with these for the CRC. A lot of good information there. Guidance for communicating effectively with regulators. I think the number one tip is going to be don't be a jerk. Next up, unique opportunities in the Jersey market, followed by regulatory updates and what to expect. So I'm going to turn it over, next slide, to Steve, and the path to getting oh, actually, this is not for Steve, this is for Casey. Path to getting operational as a, no, this is Steve, sorry, as a medical.
It's me. It's okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jen. So I think a lot of the focus today is going to be on the adult use side of things, but just for context, we'll provide a little information about how you get licensed either as a medical or adult use dispensary. For medical, there's just been, requests for applications periodically over the years. You may know that the 2019 RFA was tied up in litigation. So some of those awardees are only just now coming online. For adult use, the licensing is a little more, I guess you could say, traditional. It's open. It's open now. It's been open since last year. There are the annual licenses, which give you the full authorization, and you need site control, municipal approval, the whole package. Or you could submit a conditional license application without site control and with lesser things to convert later to the full license. So that's the initial application. Then you get to step 2, application approval. Once you receive notice that you're approved, the fight is not over at that point always. You need to make sure that you've satisfied any conditions the municipality might have set, be it the land use board or the town itself, perhaps something to do with odor control, or each town has its own kind of agenda in terms of what they want to see out of a cannabis business. But the most important thing is that you show to the CRC that the town is happy. The CRC may also want to do probity review the financials of the business, kind of explore some of the relationships the business has with other entities or out-of-state licensees. So step 2 can be kind of just as big of a lift as the step 1, but just as important. And then step 3 is the final license award and really the final steps. I guess you could say like a certificate of occupancy is on this level, anything you really need just to get open. And I think this would be a good point to transition to what we're going to talk about next, which is compliance. Not only do you now have this award, but you have to keep it, and you have to keep it in good standing. So I don't want to step on Jen's toes here, but we're going to now transition to some of those compliance essentials, and how you can keep your license in good standing after you've worked so hard to get it.
Thanks, Steve. I'll take it from here. So these are just primarily focused again on the adult use requirements, but what I really want to talk about in New Jersey is some of the compliance, top essential things that come to my mind when reviewing the regulations and now these final regulations and some of the changes. These are things that are not necessarily unique to New Jersey, but some certainly are. I would say in review generally of the New Jersey regulations, there's what I call like little Easter eggs or breadcrumbs in there for compliance that you need to not overlook. A lot of that has to do with record keeping, and we're going to hit on some of those now. So the first topic is consumer privacy requirements. While, if you're an operator right now or you're not, you're thinking, of course, you're going to keep consumer information private. But New Jersey specifically, the regulations require that a consumer is not required to provide a cannabis retailer with any personal information other than a government issued ID, pretty standard, in order to determine their identity and age. A retailer is also not allowed to collect or retain any personal information about a consumer other than information typically acquired in a financial transaction conducted by a holder of a Class C retail license concerning alcoholic beverages. Additionally, a retailer cannot keep a copy of a consumer's photo ID. So if you're thinking, yeah, of course, that's pretty standard, right? Well, this is honestly becomes an issue in a few places. One of the places that this can become an issue is your ID scanner. Your ID scanner may be set to not only collect the information as it's verifying that the ID is valid, but it can be set to retain personal information. So this can be an area that you need to focus on to make sure that you're not retaining that information. The other place that this often comes up is if you have an ID scanner that is connected to the point of sale system and kind of creates like a customer profile. What happens to that information? Is that screened out? Does the consumer opt into some sort of a communication program, some sort of a VIP program? If you are offering an online service, right, or an online ordering, and I put in my phone number, text me when my order is ready. how I'm now a cannabis retailer collecting and retaining personal information about a consumer that is not typically required in another transaction. It's, also not needed to determine my identification or my age. So that is one thing you want to be very mindful of, is retention of that information. The worst case scenario, and not that I want to be alarmist or anything, is that information is accidentally retained and accidentally accessed by somebody with, some purposes to steal somebody's identity, or worst case scenario, right? And another unique part of New Jersey's regs is a cannabis retailer personnel shall log that the examination of the photo ID and confirmation of legal age occurred in a record, and you have to maintain such record and have it available for inspection by the commission. That's a unique one, right? You don't often see that there's a log associated with the verification of the ID. So how do you comply with this? And being mindful of that as you're setting up your operations. Is this something you're going to do via your ID scanner? Is that something you're able to navigate and produce that record and have it available upon inspection? Is there something manual done at the point of sale? Some sort of like a document next to the point of sale? Is it built into your point of sale? How are you going to log this examination of the photo ID? So that's one piece that's interesting in New Jersey with the consumer information retention there. Now, the other one is transaction limits. Obviously, very, very, very important piece of compliance anywhere you operate. And in New Jersey, you are obviously required to prevent a consumer from exceeding the transaction limit in multiple transactions. A cannabis retailer in New Jersey cannot sell to a consumer in a single sales transaction more than 28.35 grams or 1 ounce of usable cannabis, which they have kind of broken down into different equivalencies based on the product type. So it's more than 4 grams of solid cannabis concentrate or 4 milliliters of liquid cannabis concentrate or oil. Previous to this final set of regs that just came out, it actually used to say 5 grams and 5 milliliters of liquid cannabis concentrate. However, on an FAQ that was on the CRC's website, it said 4. So there was a little bit of confusion, but that's been, finalized and corrected. The limit is 4. For vaporization formulation containing more than 4 milliliters, again, that was previously 5, moved to 4. And for ingestible cannabis infused products, it's an aggregate total of more than 1,000 milligrams of THC. If you're coming from any other state, sometimes you'll see 500. New Jersey, it's 1,000. And of course, it's the combination thereof. A cannabis retailer is also required to make a good faith effort to prevent a consumer from exceeding 1 ounce of usable cannabis or the equivalent weight in cannabis products in multiple sales transactions. So for compliance, it's really important to think about, how do I do that? Where does this come into play? Most commonly, your point of sale system. It has to be set up in a manner that if your staff is completing a transaction, they get some sort of a notification, okay, you cannot sell this, they're over the transaction limit. That's one step that's really important. Of course, beyond that, because what I do a lot in compliance is not just scratch the surface, is go beyond, right? That information is only as good as what you put into it, right? So making sure that in your product catalog or your product master within your point of sale system, that equivalency for purposes of exceeding the transaction limit is entered accurately. I'm not going to pretend I'm a mathematician. This stuff gets quite complicated. So, again, BS is always happy to help you navigate that, but it is quite complicated to that extent. And the other thing is training, right? So the point of sale system is important, like I said, great engineering and electronic control to prevent something exceeding the transaction limit. But staff should generally be aware of what these transaction limits are in the event that they see something at the point of sale and kind of have that head turn moment. The other part is dosing limitations, right? 100 milligrams of active THC per package and edible, 10 milligrams of active THC per serving. There's a little bit of a variance allowed in there as well. But the reason this is important in a state like New Jersey is because you do have medical products coming from expanded ATCs to adult use retailers. Now, because again, they're licensed to do both. So ensuring that the products you're getting are compliant for sale as adult use products is, of course, on the manufacturer, but on the retailer as well, right? When you get the product, reviewing that it's permissible. Consumer education. These are just some of the big ones in New Jersey. New Jersey has a requirement that a supplemental document is provided for electronic smoking device. Electronic smoking device meaning pre-filled, tamper-resistant, non-refillable, disposable, all-in-one, e-cigarette, or pre-filled, tamper-resistant, non-refillable cartridge, and separate battery use. Basically, your typical vaporizer device pieces. Each retailer that's selling one of these devices has to provide a supplemental information document that includes a list of ingredients or materials used to manufacture the electronic smoking device, instructions to consumers on how to use the electronic smoking device safely as part of the intended usage based on the manufacturer's recommendation, which shall include actually, but not be limited to, a recommended number of seconds per dose, and there's a warning required. That requirement, right, is a cannabis retailer. So if you have these products on site and you're selling them, you need to make sure you have the appropriate supplemental document for each product, as they may vary. Now, additionally, what changed actually in this recent final regulation was a cannabis retailer is required to offer to provide clearly visible information on the safe use of cannabis items to consumer at the point of sale. It used to say prior to each purchase, such as a printed copy of the information from the safe and responsible consumption provided on the Commission's website. Fantastic. Now, it went from offer to provide, right, prior to each purchase to now providing it at the point of sale. Very important piece of compliance that you move those materials from just offering them somewhere in the facility prior to purchase to the point of sale. And they, you know, the Commission gave you a lot here. They said, such as a printed copy of, and they're telling you, you know, this is a great place to find this information. Anytime regulations give you that tidbit, take it. It'll make compliance much easier for you. All right. So a part of compliance essentials is important policies and procedures that are required, that are unique to a retailer, which are criteria for refusing service to a consumer pursuant to unacceptable behavior. So as you're navigating either the inspection process, if you're currently operational, you do need to have a policy for this. You need to determine what your standard is for this. Is it intoxication, which is obviously, you know, you're not going to sell to them in that case. Is it, you know, loitering? Is it harassment? Is it, you know, what is that behavior? Do you ban customers for this behavior? How do you ban them? Is it something that gets, you know, indicated in your ID scanner? What is that policy? And determining that policy will be a part of your inspection process, as well as, you know, maintenance with that policy. And most importantly, you can have all the policies you want, but if you don't conduct the training and make sure your staff are aware of them, they're just a piece of paper. So it's very important that you get that criteria down and conduct your training. Another important policy and procedure is for ensuring customers comply with cannabis business age verification policies, right? So ID is verified at entry. That will typically happen with the ID scanner, and it's required to happen at the point of sale. And you have a requirement to have a procedure to ensure that customers comply with the cannabis business age verification policies. So how do you do that, right? How do you make sure your customers are complying with that? There's a physical measure, right? You could have a man trap or like a check-in point where if they literally do not hand you the ID scanner, I mean, their ID, and it doesn't get scanned or it's not valid, they cannot proceed any further, right? So stop that. The other policy that typically helps out in retail when you have the second ID check is the reminder at check-in. Keep your ID out. We're going to check again at the point of sale. That completes two things. One, make sure the customer is aware. And two, in the event maybe a bud tender forgets, oh, I got to check the ID again. Just seeing the ID in their hand will trigger that memory. Oh, got to make sure that second ID is completed. Of course, all of this is going to come down to training as well. And in New Jersey and in the regs, they very much have a robust requirement for documenting complaints, adverse reports of any adverse events, and any recalls. So again, during the inspection process, you're going to have these policies created, but they don't mean anything if you don't actually train on these and make sure that your staff are well aware, they're provided with the proper documentation, they know how to answer the phone or answer an email should one of these complaints or adverse events be reported. And lastly, one of my favorite compliance essentials in any state, because I just love the nuances between what is required. Just like any other state, right? New Jersey's regulations spread out the responsibilities. right? Manufacturers cannot produce a product that is not packaged and labeled in compliance with the packaging and labeling regs. Cultivators, same thing, cannot produce or package anything, cannot release for sale, cannot wholesale unless it's packaged and labeling compliant. However, a cannabis retailer also cannot sell usable cannabis and cannabis products that are, you know, not packaged in compliance with the regulations. So what does that mean, right? You can't assume, right, that the product manufacturer or the cultivator is perfect and that they did the QC, right? You also have the responsibility as a retailer. So conducting a packaging and labeling review is so important. Conducting it against a certificate of analysis. You know, that's a lot of times where errors occur. You know, if it's a manual process, people make mistakes, but you want to catch it before you sell it. You are the last line of defense. And there are some changes in the regulations that you should be aware of when it comes to packaging and labeling. Particularly, there was a change about the cannabinoid profile that may also reflect total CBG, CBN, CBC, and total THCV, total CBDV, and other cannabinoids. And I think what New Jersey does really well, like other states, is actually breaks down how they want total THC calculated and how they want it reflected on the label. So just be aware of, you know, what is explicitly required. And I always say, like, I'm empowering retailers because, again, you're the last line of defense. Have the conversation. If you have any questions about compliance, I'd rather you flag it to the wholesaler, and they probably appreciate it as well, than the CRC come to you, you know, months down the road and say you sold thousands of products that were not properly labeled and have the wrong dosage. So that's one of the last, I think, compliance essentials I wanted to hit on there. Of course, there are so many more. Again, New Jersey has a lot of documentation requirements, and this, you know, as Jen had mentioned, there are so many things in product manufacturing and cultivation that are unique to New Jersey, heavy documentation, a lot of ingredient restrictions. So if you're manufacturing and cultivation, that's a whole separate webinar for a separate day or a whole separate discussion we can certainly get into.
Great. Thank you for that, Casey. So next, we're going to talk about specific issues that face medical operators that are looking to expand to adult use. The medical dispensaries are the only independent dispensaries that are open in New Jersey right now. And in order to sell to the adult use market, they need to submit an expanded ATC application. We've worked on a few of these, and Steve is going to go through what that process looks like.
Yeah, so I think this process is a little bit unique to the expanded ATCs. This is not exactly how things will happen for the adult use licensees, but it's important to highlight the process because there are themes here that, you know, you'll see again and again, especially in adult use. So for these expanded ATC applications, the blue boxes here on this slide are kind of the first step. You not only need to have communication and support from your municipality in terms of expanding to adult use sales, but you need to also have close contact with your CRC investigator, one that you've been assigned already as an alternative treatment center, so that you can coordinate with them very closely in terms of the submission of this application. There's not really a portal for this sort of application like there is for the adult use types, so it's a little bit more of a give and take with the investigator, but either way, first step, clear communication with the town, with the investigator. Then the teal boxes here kind of break down a little bit more of what you'll need from the town. You'll need a new resolution of support unless you were thinking ahead already and got a resolution that says you're authorized for both medicinal and adult use sales. And then when you do convert to this expanded ATC, you're then bound by the municipality's adult use cannabis regulations. And in your expanded ATC application, you need to detail how you're going to comply if those adult use regulations are any different than what the medical licensees are subject to. And then I think the biggest thing here, and this may be pretty specific to the expanded ATCs, is your demonstration of fitness for doing this sort of thing. I mean, the CRC definitely still takes very seriously the ATC's responsibility to provide medical services and to prioritize patients. So throughout the application, there needs to be a lot of demonstration that you're going to, you know, provide a separate POS for medical patients and prioritize patients so that if you're low on supply, the patients will be the first to get it. Another thing, the second points here, social equity plan. This is more of a common theme that you'll see with the adult use license types too. The new regulations have expanded social equity plan requirements, and just like for the rest of the licensees, expanded ATCs are required to demonstrate a solid plan for recruiting individuals that would qualify as social equity applicants under the regulations. And then the third thing, again, kind of a common theme here among all licensed applicants, full disclosure of ownership, financing, and contractors. The CRC is very interested to see, especially for these expanded ATCs, if anything will be different now that you're expanding to both medicinal and adult use sales. So I think the key there is really full disclosure, and the less questions the CRC has to come back and ask you, the better. Better to just kind of do it all up front.
All right, thank you. And now Casey is going to talk a bit about what to expect during the facility inspection process. So when this is going to come up and what it's going to be like having the CRC at your facility.
Thanks, Jen. So the CRC may make announced or unannounced inspections of a licensed premises. So the CRC during your inspection process will come out and do an inspection. They're going to do one. Typically, they do a kind of an informal one or two prior to the formal request for the inspection to get actually final license and move on and begin your sales. The announced one, of course, you have a little bit more control. You know it's coming, but nonetheless, they're going to come in and determine compliance with their regulations and applicable statutory requirements. They'll also compare what you had provided for your policies and procedures to what you're showing them. So you really want to make sure whatever you're providing to the CRC up to this point truly does align with your operations. And more importantly, that aligns with the regulatory requirements. So conducting your own audit, either internally or third party prior to having this happen, will really make sure you're on the ready. The last thing you want to do with any regulatory body, especially CRC, is be caught in a situation where you feel like you're saying like, oh, I didn't know I had to do that. That does not look great from a compliance perspective, and to a regulator that looks like you're just not generally keyed in to what the compliance requirements are. Now the other thing is, to the extent you have record keeping requirements up to that point when you get there, of course, in the normal inspection process, you're not necessarily going to have cannabis there. Therefore, you probably don't have a lot of these logs ready. If it's an unannounced inspection, be prepared to have every single one of those logs reviewed. Or more importantly, if they see something that would then be supported by some type of documentation, like an inventory audit, your inventory is inaccurate, they're going to come and look and say, oh, well, when did you do your last audit? And then you're going to go, oh, it was 6 months ago. And then you're like, well, you're supposed to do them monthly and you're supposed to document them, right? So there's no excuse in any state, right, to not follow the regulations. And in New Jersey, with the amount of record keeping requirements, you need to stay on those record keeping requirements and ensure that all of those records are complete, because at this point is where they can be checked. During the inspection, security systems, whether it is before you're operational or once you're operational, are a huge piece of these inspections. Making sure that your video surveillance is sufficient, the locks work. You don't want a door swinging open or a vault door that doesn't have a gate that closes automatically behind you. Those are the types of things they're really going to focus on. And now what's unique in New Jersey to keep in mind is that the commission has access to your video surveillance. They also have access to your records, right? Your inventory tracking and metric records. So they can do the unannounced inspection without you really knowing, right? Like at any point they receive a complaint about a product or a question, or maybe they go somewhere else and see something that was produced by you or has some relationship to you, whatever the situation may be. It could be that at an expanded ATC, they're looking at manifests and they're seeing something that isn't accurate or some question. They can at any point do the unannounced inspection unbeknownst to you using their own access to records. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, that, being diligent on all of your record keeping, ensuring that the video surveillance and everything is up and running, working as it's supposed to at all times, and that people are conscious of camera locations as to not block them, and that they're, again, being checked for in good repair and good visibility. is so important, whether the inspection is unannounced or announced.
All right. And the importance of good communication with the regulators, Steve.
So as a licensee, as a dispensary, you'll be communicating with the regulators quite a lot, the CRC. And the most common channel of communication is, again, your investigator, which you'll be assigned either as an adult use licensee, during the investigation stage of your annual license or conditional conversion license application. For a medical ATC, it's again, just kind of during that investigatory period of review. So you kind of want to treat this person, the investigator, as a good friend almost. You, like Jen said, just don't be a jerk to them. But specifically, there are a couple of things you can do to make sure the relationship stays smooth and that you get everything you need from them and they get everything they need from you. Again, being polite, responsive, and transparent. Don't try to hide anything. Make sure you get back to the investigator quickly if they get in touch with you. And stay in touch with them. I mean, these people are here to make sure you succeed. So the more you work with them, the better it will be. Things you shouldn't do. Don't procrastinate, because sometimes investigators will reach out with random requests for documents or more information about something, financing, a question about the site plan. You have to be able to get back to them quickly. And that's kind of segues into the next point here. Choose a designated person from your team to communicate with the investigator. The investigator will usually reach out to the contact person anyway, but try not to switch contacts and try not to send too many messages from different people to the investigator. You really want to kind of just have one point person to develop that good relationship with the investigator and provide them with the things that they're asking for.
I just want to respond to one comment that I see just pop up from Gaetano in the chat. And I really do think that being on very friendly terms with your investigator is important. For the most part, these are nice people to work with. Like, they're overwhelmed, they have a big caseload, but I think that most of them really want to help you get operational. And I think that it does help move things forward. Moving on to the next topic of unique opportunities in the New Jersey market. Like, I continue to maintain that New Jersey is the most exciting cannabis market in the Mid-Atlantic, and certainly the most exciting new one in the Northeast, to my opinion. And there are some really cool new opportunities coming up with the new regs that Steve is going to cover.
Yeah, so New Jersey is kind of a hotbed for cool ideas. 3 things, 2 of which are in the regs, but 1 is not: curbside delivery and drive-through. Curbside and delivery are mentioned in the regulations, the adult use regulations, that is. But drive-through is not, and we know for certain that the CRC will permit licensees to do drive-through, but it requires very carefully detailed SOPs and obviously the permission of the municipality. All 3 of these things require that municipal permission and very detailed SOPs that the CRC will want to review for not only regulatory compliance, but just for safety and security purposes. Has to be secure and it has to be approved, but they're all possible, which is a good thing. Consumption areas, there are regulations proposed that are going to come out this year, and although few municipalities currently permit consumption, that may change, and it could start out as sort of a kind of a destination type thing, but it's something to keep an eye on this year for sure. And strip malls, it's good that the CRC recently clarified that strip malls are permissible for retailers to locate in. Strip malls are all over New Jersey, and finding property has been difficult for applicants, especially conditional applicants. So this helps ease that burden of finding properties that not only work with the municipal zoning, but are, compliant under the state regulations.
A quick question for you, Steve. I see we have a question from our friend Kirill about drive-throughs versus pickup windows. So drive-throughs need a specific waiver from the CRC. And of course, it needs to be permitted under local regulations. Pickup windows are often sort of like an in-between
solution? Like if you can't get a drive-through from the municipality, what about a pickup window? Is the CRC requiring, to your knowledge, a waiver for pickup windows?
Not that I'm aware of. I almost would say though that a pickup window, depending on the placement, is kind of considered to be curbside. So again, curbside expressly contemplated by the adult use regulations. If you're talking about a medical only ATC, these things are not addressed by the regulations. So it may be possible that they ask for a waiver request because there are no regulations that cover these things. But I think for adult use, it's doable, and whether a waiver is required or not, it may be, but it's not something that's out of the realm of possibility.
Okay, cool. So New Jersey issued some new regulations. So they issued their first set of regulations in August of 2021, which were temporary and enforced for, supposed to be for a year. It ended up being for a year and a half. They revised those regulations last August, and they finally made their way to the register. And there were a lot of interesting changes in many different fronts. But I think specific for compliance, Steve, you're going to cover some of the interesting updates we've had.
Yeah, so we applaud the CRC for issuing more detailed, clear regulations. Some of the big changes, they've included a definition of physical plant, which helps micro businesses calculate the amount of space they can use to hit that 2,500 square foot cap. That is certainly a good thing for people that are interested in applying as a micro business. Casey had mentioned before the revised consumer education requirements. The CRC takes very seriously the responsibility that dispensaries have towards educating patients, consumers, just on safe use and other specific things like the electronic cigarettes. There's a lot of safety requirements here, and I think the CRC is continuing to move in that direction with its updates. The transaction limits, that had been a point of confusion for a while because the FAQs again had the lower amount 4, but the regs did not. They had 5. So good for compliance to know exactly how much your transaction limits are. And then there was the removal of the logo size limitation, which kind of helps open up the packaging labeling front a little bit for manufacturers and cultivators. And then just a couple more things here. The original regulations didn't have very detailed guidance on the destruction of cannabis waste. That's changed now. Very detailed guidance. So dispensaries, other licensees have much clearer guidance and a path towards compliant waste destruction. Mentioned before about the expanded social equity workforce requirements. This is certainly, again, something that the CRC cares very deeply about, something that's throughout the Act and the regulations. Licensees need to provide quarterly updates on their social equity workforce development, good faith efforts. So that's something that I think you'll continue to see worked into the regulations. Again, the consumption area regulations still pending, subject to public comment. A little bit restrictive as is right now in terms of having food, or there's probably room for change there, but something to keep an eye on. And then the last thing here is updated medical regulations. The current medical regulations are old and they don't align with the adult use regulations. Hence why, say you're a medical operator and you want to do delivery or curbside delivery, they did a waiver, a broad one, but some of these things are just not addressed by the old regulations. So the CRC has made a lot of progress, but they still have plenty to do this coming year.
Okay, one thing, I'm going to go a little off script here to talk about consumption area changes. So we have this restriction on the retailers with consumption lounges selling food or beverages on premises, and that's found in the law. So it's really outside the regulators' hands. But the regulators have opened the possibility of consumers being able to order food from the consumption area and consume it there, as long as it wasn't purchased from the license holder, basically. What about having a restaurant in the same building but separate premises? Casey, in particular, I'm interested in both of your opinions on that. Like, how is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, sure, I think so. There's a way to kind of navigate the rules here. In terms of the actual consumption area, you're pretty limited in terms of there cannot be a restaurant that's associated with the consumption area itself. But I'm sure with some crafty strategy, you could strategically locate a restaurant pretty close to the consumption area, and there's no restriction on common ownership or anything like that between a restaurant and the consumption area. So
Yeah, and you
Yeah,
could have like a strip mall situation where it's like all the same building, just separate premises. Sorry, go ahead, Casey.
yeah, that was literally exactly what I was going to say. You know, you still have the contemplation that you can't have like a secret door that connects in like a storage area, or like something in the back of house where the two would connect, or sharing a server space, or the things that come into any consideration when you share a facility or a wall, literally, with anyone who's not your licensed premises.
Would you need like a separate, like, could there be any common areas between them? Like, could you have like a restaurant operating on like the second or third floor of your building and they have to walk through like a sort of shared stairway?
I think presumably, right? I mean, I think if it's done properly and laid out that way, where, you know, you're again, like the premises wouldn't start until you reach the doorway of the actual dispensary, or I mean, sorry, the social consumption area, versus having the door go to a pizza place somewhere else. I guess it's really you're going to have to get creative on layout, and again, make or hope the commission will see that this is a safe way to do this. And it does align with the policies and procedures and everything that they're trying to do with social consumption.
All right. Awesome. I think that there's definitely a way to do it. Like if you can be in the same building, be in the same strip mall, like as long as the premises are separate, it seems doable. Well, thank you for that. Moving on, operational changes that we're seeing this year.
So some of these things we've kind of covered a little bit in the regulatory update, but others, again, the CRC is a very packed agenda for this year. They've been very busy, and it looks like they'll continue to be very busy. What to expect this year: additional licensing for wholesalers, distributors, and delivery. The CRC has hinted that the applications for these license types will be available soon, but I can't remember them ever saying when. And they changed the notice of application acceptance not too long ago, but didn't add these license types. So to be seen. I'm pretty confident that it's coming in 2023, just not yet. We have regs for those license types, so there's not really much else to wait for. Consumption areas, just spoke about. I think you'll be seeing a lot in the news this year. I've heard that there's one coming in Newark and in Atlantic City, so will be a hot topic. Product approvals, you're likely to see new products in the market and ones that are, manufacturers are seeking the CRC's approval for, that there is a process for that. So I think as consumers become more used to what they're seeing now in the stores, there's going to be a demand for new cool products. And I think there will be some of that this year for sure. Another one is the CRC's interpretation of management services agreements. The regulations give the CRC plenty of latitude to interpret these agreements, but we're not entirely sure in practice how that's going to go down. So certainly something to be interested, that we're all interested in seeing this year.
What kind of changes do you see coming on like the interpretation of management services agreements?
Curiosity. I guess just interpretations of what's fair and what's commercially reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
There's pretty clear guidelines for things that are definitely not commercially reasonable or provide an unfair advantage over the licensee, but
mm-hmm.
it's a long regulation, and I think there's room for them to kind of change their interpretation of things or be a little easier on certain requirements. So we shall see.
Definitely a lot of room for them to change their interpretation and decide how they want to move forward. Definitely management services agreements receive the most scrutiny of any business relationship that I'm seeing.
And then a couple of things that we think won't change this year. There is no movement on the limitation on DBAs, and as a result, I think you'll still name changes. No one wants their dispensary to be called ABC Holding Company LLC. It's just not a good name, and there's no way around it currently for those adult use licensees. So lots of name change. Make sure you get the right name down on paper and make sure it's not taken already. And then the types of edibles that may be manufactured or sold based on the sentiment from the CRC in their public meetings, Jeff Brown, I don't think that baked good edibles are immediately on the horizon. They should be on the horizon at some point, but it seems like the CRC is going to slow roll this and be very cautious with the rollout, including updating the regulations as necessary.
What about infused foods in New Jersey? Like, is that, my read is probably not allowed.
Yeah, I think anything that's like anything that's a baked good is a no. And I think
even infused like dinners, like infused mashed potatoes, like it's not the cookies that they sort of put out in the summary, but I also don't know that they would allow infused mashed potatoes to be sold somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a no on food products generally, but there's dispensaries are selling like oral suspensions, and you can kind of make your own, I guess, if in that vein. But yeah, I don't expect to see any sort of like Arby's at your dispensary or hot food aisle there.
Maybe that's okay. For the DBAs, I just wanted to make the point that even though there's this restriction on DBAs, which like I honestly can't see the logic behind, like I don't know that it actually serves any good purpose. However, the CRC has made it really easy to change your name. Would you guys agree with that?
I would say so. There's a clear path to do it. If you're, depending on where you are in your application, it could be a little tricky if you're not fully reviewed yet and you're really dying to change your name right then and there. You may end up needing to resubmit a lot of or most of your application, but once you're approved, yeah, I think they've anticipate that a lot of people will need to change their names. So
awesome, thank you. All right. So key takeaways. First, Casey, what would you say is like key takeaway from all of this?
Yeah, I mean, from a compliance perspective, one of the key takeaways is that New Jersey has a lot of documentation requirements and just general regulatory requirements that are either very poignant and very specific, and there's no wiggle room. And then there's other sections that are pretty broad. The most important thing I would say, and big thing to take away, is that you need to stay on top of these changes and stay on top of communication from the CRC. What we found is that a lot of communication goes directly to the licensees. There isn't an abundance of public information like guidance documents and things like that posted on a regular clip as there is direct communication to the licensee. So make sure that you have a really good point person who's monitoring compliance and receives all these memos and shares information. The other takeaway is that, I like the New Jersey regs. They're pretty complex and there are just a lot of facets to them. Retail is one thing, but there's a lot to unpack on the manufacturing and cultivation as well.
Awesome, thank you. Steve, parting thoughts.
I think just the CRC wants you to succeed. They want this market to be stood up. So it's a little intimidating, all of the regulations that apply here, but good faith effort towards complying. And just again, you may not have to be the friend of the investigator, but you should at least be cordial and give them what they want. And they'll try to help you get to the finish line. We've seen it happen in practice. So if you put your best foot forward and have the right team, the right people attending to these compliance issues, just keeping the big picture in mind, then you should be able to succeed.
Thank you. And I'd say like my parting thought, which I think is pretty repetitive of what Casey said, but sort of calls back to something she talked about in the slides earlier, is just there are so many reporting requirements in New Jersey that it can be really easy to fall out of compliance with them. Like, what was it? There's the reporting on your meeting social equity goals. It used to be a monthly requirement and now it's quarterly. Like, it's so easy to just not remember that. Or like if you're already at capacity with your employees, like what additional actions can you do? You can always make sure you're hiring more diverse vendors, but it's hard to keep giving information on progress to the CRC on a quarterly basis. And what was the other one, Casey? I think it's like the log.
Yeah, the log that you're verifying the identification of your consumers. It's interesting. It's different, but it's
Like,
there.
how is a dispensary, like, who should take care of this at a dispensary? Like, the general manager's too busy to do it. Like, do you have to have a full-time compliance person?
I think it's going to depend on your size. There should definitely be somebody that is tasked with compliance, that is their, not necessarily primary function, but it is a part of their role. I could see that a GM, it might be a little bit too much, but there should be somebody that within their day-to-day compliance is a part of their role. And now remember, this can also be spread out a little bit, where you have like inventory. If you think about even an inventory manager, their entire job is really compliance, right? It's compliant with inventory tracking, real-time tracking. They live in that world. They may also be the person doing packaging and labeling. But overall, either you have somebody internally, or you rely on some outside consultancy or somebody to kind of do like a third-party check. Because again, what I see all the time is I have worked with some amazing compliance managers, but as things sit and as you grow and as you're moving and as the operational priorities change, things get overlooked. And it's really important to kind of bubble up those compliance needs again and put a fresh set of eyes on something. Maybe you've always done it this way, and the CRC didn't say anything when they were at the inspection last time, but it doesn't mean it's compliant, and it doesn't mean that it can't be done and documented in a better way.
Yeah, so the real takeaway I'm getting here is it's just super important to have someone on your team that is tasked with this. And even if they're not doing everything and they are working with the consultants or the lawyers or whomever it is providing this outside compliance help, you need one person inside that is monitoring it.
At minimum, monitoring, if not enforcing.
Actively keeping track of it.
Exactly.
I just feel like there's so many opportunities for the CRC to show up at an inspection and just be like, gotcha. 12 different items.
Yeah, there really is.
And so Casey, you've been doing like on-site inspections before before a lot of our businesses are working, like getting their final inspection from the CRC.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are we often finding issues during that process?
Yeah, and it's honestly, I find issues right from the get sometimes. If you're not taking a look at even floor plans, even your build out can set you up for failure when it comes to compliance. If you're not thinking about how is this place going to operate, things are going to fall to the wayside. The one that I see all the time is the vault is too small. Obviously, it's a regulatory compliance issue because you're not storing, any finished goods properly in accordance with the regs. You run out of space. What do? Well, there needs to be proper, if you had thought about the size of the vault, if you had thought about the flow in the facility, if you thought about which doors were going to be open, when you design the floor plan, you're going to be able to prevent this from happening in the long run. The other thing that I find, and when you're going into brand new inspections, is that you don't have the logs ready, which sounds weird, right? You're thinking, oh, well, I don't have any cannabis here. It doesn't matter. If you don't have the logs at that stage, there's just operationally, right? You're going to get going. You may never turn back and remember or even think about those logs. You got to have those ready and ingrained in your staff right from the get-go. And, it's generic, but that culture of compliance, it's bottom up, top down, like everybody needs to be aware of what their requirements are and that there's a reason we ask you to do these things, like the log, right? The consumer ID log. We're not just asking you because I really just want you to put, a check mark on this document next to your point of sale system. Like there is a reason for everything we're asking you to do.
And doing that bit of prep before you have the CRC come out can just make a world of difference in avoiding like a deficiency or like getting fined. Like they're not scared to fine people.
That's right. They are not scared to fine people. The CRC's enforcement action is available on the website. There are fines that have been issued. And that's something to think about. It's not always going to be a situation where they give you, a chance to fix it before a fine is issued. It's just, they can see that there's a violation and this is the outcome. So yeah, stay on top of it. And again, like you said, set yourself up for success, right? During that first
Yeah.
inspection.
We have a couple minutes left. If you have any remaining questions, please put them in the chat. One parting thought, final parting thought, I have so many parting thoughts, is that I think in New Jersey, the fact that the medical regulations haven't been updated may have like caused a bit of harm in that the existing ATCs are operating in a world that's just not totally governed by regulation. The medical regs just don't actually conform to how things are done in reality. Like the restriction on like signs being like what's white text on a black background, or the opposite, black text on a white background, like it's just not even followed. So there's maybe this idea that like you don't have to actually totally follow the rules, but that's not how it is with adult use. There are incredibly detailed rules, and the CRC is kind of applying the adult use rules to the medical operators as well. Like it's just, I think it's a culture change in how cannabis is being regulated in the state. I did see one question about to-go food at a consumption lounge. Like, yeah, my read is that it's totally permissible to bring in food or have food delivered to you at a consumption lounge. Steve, do you agree with that?
Yes, and you know, in the same vein with consumption, I see someone else asked about how much a person can consume. There are rules about, you know, the retailer slash consumption area proprietor is supposed to make sure that people don't bring in more than the transaction limit, and also are supposed to stop people from consuming if they're quote unquote displaying visible signs of intoxication. So it is something the CRC has at least proposed and could see changes to that.
Mm-hmm. When I saw the revised consumption rules, I was really upset that they weren't allowing food in the consumption lounges. And again, this is in the statute, and it just seemed like a way that they're cutting off these businesses from making money. Because I mean, how much weed are you really going to sell people to consume? Like a joint is enough. So for you to hang out there for like your 2 hours and move on. And if you can't like get water or coffee, like you're gonna have to get up and eat something or drink something. I almost wonder if this is like a kind of totally unintentional blessing in disguise, requiring these businesses to set up a completely separate food service business next door that is not subject to 280E. So you keep your accounting totally separate for it, and you can own both of them. Just workshopping that idea, but I think that actually may be the way to go, and it might be better. Let me see. Food, specifically beverages, need to be approved. Well, any final thoughts, or maybe we end 2 minutes early?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions are really good ones, and some of them, you know, we're just going to need to see, I think, this year. And like Jen said, especially with the medical retailers, not all of the rules are really in writing. So it's kind of a wait and see in terms of how the CRC enforces or provides guidance to these licensees on some of these issues.
Yeah, and I can answer just one last one of the questions on here about unannounced inspections. Are they truly unannounced? They certainly can be. They are not always, right? Like you could have an inkling that they're coming. You could be talking to your investigator and they're asking questions about a particular process. And they're like, you know what, we may be in the area. You know, it depends on, again, that relationship with your investigator. Are you going to get the heads up or not? They don't have to. The other question I want to answer real quickly is, are other non-cannabis specific compliance issues checked during inspections, i.e. OSHA? Yes. Not always by the CRC, that it could actually be OSHA, right? But New Jersey regulations actually more on the product manufacturing side, of course, specifically the product manufacturing side, require an OSHA inspection prior to license issuance. So they are certainly paying attention to that. And sometimes what happens is, and honestly, typically, right, CRC is going to defer to OSHA. That's why they built this into the regulations, to say you have to have a consultation and you have to comply with any recommendations. Same thing, good manufacturing practices must be followed. So there are so many other outside sets of regulations and entities that you need to be prepared for compliance with. typically at retail, what I would see is somebody just looking at the fire extinguisher to check for expiration. Very simple way to check for life safety at an inspection that may be like typically outside of what a cannabis specific regulatory requirement may be. But remember, it's a blanket safety requirement, health and safety. So at any point they can check any requirements around those things, even, you know, fire alarm detection devices and basic inspections like that you have to complete.
Well, Steve, Casey, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in. It's awesome to see so many of our clients tuning in. We will be sharing the presentation and recording with everybody afterwards. And just want to say, like, our compliance team is just freaking awesome. Like, it's just a pleasure to work with you guys. So thanks everyone.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, everybody.